Welcome to the Kapital News. I am your host, Alex Karitis. Today is Tuesday, May 26, 2020. Thank you so much for joining me. Hope you all enjoyed your long Memorial Day weekend. Today, the title, As History Repeats. This is going to be a continuation of a few of our podcasts from last week, where we are doing a deeper dive into the history of the Great Depression era, to show this audience what we have been discussing here for months, that the federal government today is mimicking in rhetoric and in action what the government and the Federal Reserve did almost 100 years ago during the Great Depression. And in fact, it were those policies that were enacted by the federal government in conjunction with the Federal Reserve in the 1920s, 1930s that turned what would have been a severe recession into the Great Depression. I hope you are starting to understand the importance of history. Just for a little bit of perspective, if nothing else, of course, you are free to assign as much or as little weight to it as possible. You can be in and of the camp that this time is different, that there is no gold standard this time, that we are much further removed as a society from the definition of what it means to be an American. And so that memory, that identifying factor that can be so important to keeping a country together, well, you could say that's been diminished, it's evaporated, it's completely gone. So you can make an argument that this is a completely new paradigm, that this time is different, but I would just caution you, again, using history as a guide, people have said that before. People said that during the 1920s, the roaring 1920s. This is it. We figured it out. We solved the riddle. We've decoded the mystery of the Sphinx. We figured everything out. We're geniuses. We have our mathematical models. Our government is in tip-top shape. We have the best people in all branches of government. Bureaucracy is streamlined. This is how a system is supposed to operate. This time is different. Stocks have reached a permanent plateau. This is some of the rhetoric that was stated during the Roaring '20s. They thought it was different then. They thought they were the masters of the universe, that nothing could go wrong. They had a contingency for everything, and those contingencies wouldn't even have to be used because they were the masters of the universe, pulling on all of the levers of power, of industry, of finance, of economics, of society. Don't have to worry about a thing. And then we had the Great Depression. So don't think that it can't happen again. We have the global protests that were taking place well before the onset of COVID-19. These are not transitory, they're history in the making. This weekend you probably saw overseas in Hong Kong, they are back to the streets protesting because of all of the issues that were taking place prior to COVID-19. And now Beijing is fanning the flames and is wanting to become even more dominant in the lives of the people of Hong Kong. So if you thought it was bad before, and it was, it's even worse now. From a political standpoint, clearly with this new law that China is attempting to pass, the geopolitics, and the effects of COVID-19. And again, not to mention all of the deteriorating fundamental structural issues that we have been discussing here on an economic basis since this podcast has been online for over a year. Put all this stuff together, ladies and gentlemen, it is not going to get better anytime soon. Back to normal, the only back to normal that I am hopeful of and really want is, of course, when it relates to health. Let's get some therapies. Let's do what we got to do. Let's get rid of this thing. But that's what I'm talking about. Back to normal economically, that was completely insane. It's completely unsustainable. I hope I made that point clear to this audience for the past year. And those of you who may be joining for the first time or recently, go back and look at the history of our podcasts, because this is a continuing theme. That's why I do this podcast. We wrote our book, The Cynic's Guide to Investing, that was published in 2015 already. We said in that book, you have not heard the last of us, because I was a co-author on this book. Well, that's why I am doing the Kapital News, because that book, as in-depth as it was, can only go so far. Environments change, opinions change, analysis changes, and that's why this podcast is online. To equip you with information. I don't give investment advice. I give you information. I give my analysis. I give my opinion. You think for yourself. You do what you think is best for you. But this is simply a continuation of that book with the environment in which we find ourselves and, of course, where we think we are headed. And we have a pretty good track record. So, as history repeats, market performance today after the long weekend, well, any type of justification to rally, the markets love it, and so they did. With the quote-unquote reopening of the economy, people out on the beaches, getting into some bars, restaurants, spending some money, markets loved it. Of course, you also had another headline with vaccines, so that's just catnip. That's just another hit of crack cocaine for these people on Wall Street, so rally across the board and globally as well. Not surprising, giving the headlines and giving all of this what I think is really premature optimism. I'm an optimist by nature, but I'm a realist too, and I'm not going to lie to you. And I just think that this optimism, especially short term, is just completely unfounded. And it's going to hurt a lot of people. If it wasn't going to hurt people, I really wouldn't care as much as I do. But because it's going to hurt people, it's going to catch so many people off guard. That's what I have a problem with. And then, of course, a lot of this is obviously backed up by what the government is doing and what the Federal Reserve is doing with just buying, printing, spending, borrowing, begging, doing whatever we got to do to keep this thing propped up, which is what they attempted to do back in the Great Depression, as we have been outlining over the past couple of days. And we're going to continue that discussion here shortly, but I do want to make sure that we get to today's market performance. Right now, in overnight trading on the futures market, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the S&P 500 are both up about 1 percentage point. The NASDAQ 100 is up 1.25%. So a couple big numbers have been hit. Dow Jones is now trading north of 25,000. The S&P 500 is north of 3,000. And the NASDAQ 100 is trading slightly above 9,500. Of course, you will have calls, I'm sure of it, of NASDAQ 10,000. And if we continue with this, we'll be there by next week. If we can just continue with this rate of growth over the next week, we'll be there. In the cash trade in Japan, they are also trading up about 0.8%. All green across the board in Europe and the major exchanges. UK, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain all up anywhere from 1 to 2%. Cash trade in Australia is also up 0.7%. On the commodity front, WTI is trading at $34.25 a barrel. Brent, $36.12 a barrel. Natural gas, $1.78 per million British thermal units. Gold and silver pulled back a little bit today. Obviously, people thinking that it's a risk-on environment, so let's get into stocks. We don't need the safety of gold, so it pulled back, trading at $1,706 an ounce. Silver trading at $17.04 an ounce. This does not deter me from my long-held belief that we are in a precious markets bull market run. Do your research. Bonds, Uncle Sam's 10-year Treasury note yielding 0.7%. So that's some of the market performance. We'll see how far we get today in Austrian economist, his book, A History of Money and Banking in the United States, the Colonial Era to World War II. Still making my way through, a little bit more than halfway through. And to be perfectly honest with you, however, what I'm going to read to you guys today is just a continuation of where we left off. This is not me skipping ahead chapters or pages or anything. This is just simply a continuation where I left off. That's how much information is in this book and how much is relevant to the comparisons, the correlations as to what transpired during the 1920s, 1930s, and what is happening today. And we're even going to go back a little bit further as Rothbard sets the stage for another key player in all of this insanity that was adopted and implemented during the 1920s and 1930s. So, continuing where we left off, this is the advent of Eugene Meyer Jr. Just a little background on him. He worked during the Wilson administration, Democratic presidency, which is somewhat important. But just so you understand that, Wilson was a Democrat, very progressive. His father was a banker, immigrated to the United States. Eugene Meyer was a political operator. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And he later became a governor of the Federal Reserve System. And we will get to that here shortly. But that's just a little bit of color, very clear, very concise, because I can't read all 500 pages. That's not what this podcast is about. It's not simply a book club. This is not audible.com or whatever it is, reading books. So if you want further color and clarity on a lot of these interconnections, who's married to who's a cousin of who's whose uncle, who became president, who became secretary of this, buy the book. And I highly suggest, as I've been stating over the past few days, buy everything that Murray Rothbard has written. Easy to understand, draws the lines, makes the connections, and explains it. Very well written. Very well written. So that is Eugene Meyer. So you're going to hear his name coming up. Okay? So with that background, I'm going to read some of this stuff to you guys now. More important for his eventual role in the Hoover administration was Meyer's crucial part in the War Finance Corporation, the WFC. Incidentally, that's the ticker symbol for Wells Fargo, WFC. The WFC had been set up by Secretary of the Treasury McAdoo in May of 1918. So, of course, this is under the Wilson administration. Ostensibly to finance industries essential to the war effort. Meyer was named the WFC's managing director. The WFC massively subsidized American industry. During the war, it had two basic functions. One was acting as agent of the Treasury to prop up the markets for U.S. government bonds. Sound familiar? During the last 6 months of the war, Meyer spent $378 million to keep government bonds from falling by more than 1/4 point a day, and later resold the bonds to the Treasury at the cost of purchase. The second and dominant function of the WFC was to subsidize and bail out firms and industries in trouble, allegedly, quote, essential to the war effort. Bail out firms and industries in trouble, allegedly essential to the war effort. What word are we hearing thrown around on a daily basis? Essential versus non-essential. Can't make this stuff up, folks. The WFC began with an authorized capital of $500 million supplied by the Treasury and with the power to borrow up to $3 billion through the issue of bonds. Another breather here, right? $500 million. What does the Treasury Department now have access to through the CARES Act, or as we put it, the Nobody CARES Act? Oh, that's right, $500 billion to do as they please. What was the title of last week's podcast on Friday? From millions to trillions, right? Swap out the word. If it says millions in 1920, it's billions today. If it said billions in 1920, it's now trillions today. So here you have it. The WFC began with an authorized capital of $500 million supplied by the Treasury. Now it's $500 billion. And with the power to borrow up to $3 billion. Swap it out. $3 billion then to $3 trillion today. It's the same numbers, just add a comma and a few zeros. This is insanity. $3 billion. That is $3 billion then. It's now $3 trillion today. That is what we are going to be borrowing just for the second quarter of this year. And now, being the end of May, we're already 2/3 through the quarter. April, May, and June. And we're not done. Continuing, its major focus was on utilities, railroads, and the banks that had financed them. Banks were also under strain because many of their savings deposits had been drawn down to help finance the federal deficit. It was clear that the essential mission of the WFC acted as a camouflage for a government subsidy operation. Exactly what I'm calling this today, a financial and economic coup d'etat right under our noses, right in our faces. Here's $500 billion for them. Here's another $3 trillion we're going to borrow. Here's trillions on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. Here's trillions more in the money supply. You don't get it. You'll get $1,200 if you're lucky. Your sit down and shut up money. But those well-connected, those who are quote-unquote essential, are making out like bandits. I hope you're starting to understand this. If the WFC, and for that matter the rest of the apparatus of war collectivism, which is basically the belief that the government has to take a big step in directing the traffic of the economy, had been strictly war-related, they all would have been dropped swiftly as soon as the armistice was signed on November 11th, 1918, ending World War I. But on the contrary, Baruch, Meyer, the War Industries Board, and most business leaders were anxious to continue the benefits of collectivism indefinitely after the war was over. Surprise, surprise. Surprise, surprise. Everybody who likes getting the quote-unquote free money wants that gravy train to continue, even though this was for wartime. Oh no, the war's over. Let's keep the gravy train going. The goals were twofold. Price controls to keep prices up during the expected post-war recession, and a permanent peacetime cartelization of American industry enforced by the federal government. Again, this is right after World War I. So this is before the Great Depression. This is Rothbard setting the stage for what is coming and how bad it was even then. Price controls. What did I tell you was going to happen? We're already starting to see that. Farmers, got to get the prices up. President Trump, praising any time oil prices went down over the past 3 years. It's a great tax break for everybody. It's the best thing ever. No problems. Now when they go down, we got to get them back up. We got to get them back up. See how quick things can change? And back then, during World War I, you had people like Smedley Butler, who we've talked about here, the highly decorated Marine general who told us that war is a racket. You then later have President Eisenhower warning us of the military-industrial complex. Well, this is the precursor to all of this stuff. This is what this is. This is using war as justification for these types of policies, the WFC, the War Industries Board, all of these types of programs. Again, we complain about all of the programs and the facilities and the acronyms they use today. They had them back then too. It's just a complete continuation, and they don't let crises go to waste. They don't. And they are seizing this one. And of course, this is all going to be enforced by the federal government. That's what they say. That's what they wanted. Skipping ahead a little bit here. Eugene Meyer eventually resigns from the WFC because there was some pushback from some other members within the Wilson administration who sort of wanted to revert to going, let's adopt some laissez-faire policies here. The war's over. Let's do a little bit more of that stuff because, it's American. That's what we're supposed to do. And so he overruled Meyer on a handful of things. Meyer couldn't take it anymore, so he resigned his post. And then we'll pick up here real briefly. Unfortunately, however, Eugene Meyer was soon back in the saddle. Recession always follows an inflationary boom. A recession hit in the fall of 1921, and the newly growing farm bloc began its long-term drive to get the government to bring the farmer back to the unprecedented good times he had enjoyed from the artificial export boom created by World War I. Sound familiar? Farming, subsidies, bailouts. It's quite astonishing. It's quite astonishing. Let's see what else. I'm going to skip over that. That's some blah, blah, blah stuff. Again, if you're interested, buy the book. A lot of details, but I'm not going to bore you to death with everything. I just want to hit on the major points here of interest. Again, we're talking about Meyer. His lengthy record in charge of inflationary government lending, in addition to his service in helping swing the New York Republican delegation to Hoover at the Republican Convention of 1928, made Eugene Meyer eminently qualified to be Hoover's new governor of the Federal Reserve Board in the autumn of 1930. It doesn't matter, folks. This guy worked for Wilson. He was an inflationist, big government, money spending, deficit spending, bail out your buddies. Now he's pushing for a Republican. That's why I said pay attention. Wilson's a Democrat. It makes no difference. You're simply listening to what you want to hear. That's all it is. What sweet nothings whispered in your ear do you want to hear? Bigger government, go with the Democrats. More internationalism, come tax cuts, yada, yada, yada. Well, then you're going to go with the Republicans. At the end of the day, what do you get? You get the bill. You like the price of the bill? 25 trillion, 25.5 trillion and counting. You like that bill? $4 trillion deficits. That sound good to you? There's no difference. These people do not care. They're just the puppets. You have to pay attention to the puppet masters. Who gets these people in power? Who backs them? Who finances them? Who has their ear and convinces them to adopt these policies? Remember a few weeks ago, a couple months ago, whenever they passed the Nobody Cares Act? Remember the title of that podcast? 99-0. No votes for America. I don't care what any Republican said on Fox News or on his or her Twitter account. I don't care what any Democrat said on MSNBC or on his or her Twitter account. Oh, this is going to be a bailout for industry close to Trump. Oh, this is going to be nothing but hidden tax loopholes and more tax cuts that somehow the Republicans are going to throw in there. Oh, and then the Republicans complaining about deficit spending and this, that, and the other. I don't care what they might have said. What did they do? They passed it. 99-0 in the United States Senate. 99-0. And of course, a sweeping vote on the House side as well. And signed into law with a huge smile on his face was from President Donald Trump. They were in complete agreement with all of this. And you're going to be paying the bill, your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids. Okay? They don't care. Are you understanding there is no difference amongst them? It's all the same game. Skipping forward. By early September of 1931, even before Britain's abandonment of the gold standard, President Hoover, Eugene Meyer, and the nation's financial establishment all agreed that America required a massive infusion of more money and credit under the direction of the federal government. There was one difference. Whereas Meyer and the bankers wanted a revival of the War Finance Corporation for government to pour in the new money directly, Hoover first wanted to try a dab of his characteristic government-business partnership to encourage private bankers to contribute the necessary hundreds of millions of dollars to a federal agency. Hoover set up his National Credit Corporation, the NCC, to attract some $500 million from banks in order to shore up shaky individual banks. But when the NCC was only able to raise $150 million, Hoover quickly and cheerfully threw in the towel, and by the end of November agreed to introduce a bill into Congress to revive the old WFC and expand it for peacetime uses into a new Reconstruction Finance Corporation, the RFC. One piece of crap simply renamed and rebranded into another piece of crap. The RFC bill, which sailed through Congress, of course it did, by late January of 1932, provided for the Treasury to pour $500 million of capital into the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which was empowered to issue securities to an additional $1.5 billion, very much like today. Fractional reserve banking, it can be levered up. The RFC could make loans to banks and financial institutions of all types. The theory was that, ensured of freedom from failing, the timid banks would be emboldened to lend massively to business and industry. The money supply would dramatically rise and prosperity would return. Ensured of freedom from failing, too big to fail. And we thought that was a catchphrase just for the great financial crisis. Nope, took place back then too. And of course, look, money supply. The money supply would dramatically rise and prosperity would return. That was the theory then. That's the theory now. If it's just so simple to print money and to increase the money supply, didn't work then, what makes them think it's going to work now? We're just going to do more? We'll see how this plays out on the other side. It's going to be very interesting how it all plays out, isn't it? This senator, I want to see if I want to talk about this. Yes, this again simply tells you that there is no difference amongst the parties, or how little they even understand how they might be being played by somebody who has the skills of Meyer. So again, this is referring to the RFC. Hoover's original bill was even more sweeping, also allowing the RFC to make business loans to, quote, bona fide institutions. But the Senate Democrats, suspicious of excessive executive power over business, killed this proposal. The Senate Democrats also reportedly extracted a promise from Hoover to make the beloved Eugene Meyer chairman of the new RFC. Meyer, doing double duty as governor of the Federal Reserve Board and head of the RFC, was now the most powerful single economic and financial force in the federal government. Told you this guy is an operator. Bona fide institutions. What's that mean? How was that defined? Again, there goes basically, synonymous or analogous with essential versus non-essential. Whoever the government thinks is a winner is going to get the money. Whoever they don't like, for whatever reason, isn't going to get it, or they're not going to get as much. But the Senate Democrats, suspicious of excessive executive power over business, killed this one proposal. The only reason the Democrats were suspicious and made that known was because Hoover was a Republican. Reverse it, you'd have the same thing on the other side. If it had been a Democratic president, it would have been the Republicans who were suspicious of excessive executive force. That's all it is, folks. It's a huge game. But I'm just telling you, I'm just showing you who this guy is. Meyer was. He was on both things. Even the Democrats wanted him back in the fold. That's what I'm telling you. Rothbard continues to give a little bit more perspective, context, and flavor to the RFC, describing how it's formed and some of the other branches and things that were secondary to it. Again, you want those details by the book, but I'm going to continue just with that in mind. Each of these loan agencies established an advisory committee consisting of the leading local bankers to scrutinize and pass on loan applications. This arrangement placed tremendous political and financial power into the hands of local bankers armed with federal power. Sound familiar with the PPP? Moreover, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation was not required to reveal the names of borrowers or the amounts of its loans to Congress or the public. My oh my, doesn't that sound familiar as well? No transparency, no oversight, or very little. A tremendous political and economic power was thus placed in the RFC and bankers associated with it. Even progressive Senator George Norris of Nebraska lamented that he had never envisioned, quote, putting the government into business as far as this bill would put it, end quote. A progressive at the time. Loves government intervention. He was shocked by what was taking place here under a Republican administration. Hoover and his associates rationalized this power as being a temporary necessity to handle an emergency, supposedly much like World War I, when the prototype of the RFC had been established. Thus, Hoover repeatedly spoke of fighting the Depression as the equivalent of fighting a war. Quote, "We are engaged in a fight upon 100 fronts, just as positive, just as definite, and requiring just as greatly the moral courage, the organized action, the unity of strength, and the sense of devotion in every community as in war." End quote. Who does that sound like? Does that sound like the president and his lackeys saying that he is a wartime president, that we are fighting the invisible enemy on multiple fronts? As history repeats. As history repeats. Many other members of the Hoover administration also clung to this rhetoric. And so too did business and financial leaders rationalize their hasty embrace of collectivism in the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. An illuminating article in the magazine of Wall Street, summarizing the congressional debate over the RFC bill, noted that big business, quote, always complaining of public intervention in economic matters, end quote, was now beating the drums for intervention, the RFC being supported by big bankers, industrialists, and railroad presidents. The article added, quote, "The answer made by representatives of business to the charge of socialism is that in all great emergencies, war, for example, governments have always thrown themselves into the breach, because only they can organize and mobilize the whole strength of the nation. In war, every country becomes practically a dictatorship, and every man's resources are at its command. The country is now in an equally great emergency," end quote. Very scary. There isn't an escape clause there is not an escape clause in the U.S. Constitution. There is not break glass in case of emergency, an event of emergency. Jefferson, Adams, and Franklin didn't write in fine print in the U.S. Constitution, let's give this whole thing up if there's a pandemic. Let's just give this whole thing up if there's a war. It's not how it works, ladies and gentlemen. In fact, that's when that document is most tested, as is the fabric of society, as is the identity of a country. And of course, this being the United States of America. But there you have it. Even back then, big business always complaining of public intervention. Doesn't that sound familiar? And now, oh, woe is us. Woe is us. All of, airlines, right? All of these damn regulations, everything we got to do. Hey, we lost all this money. You guys got to come bail us out. Now they all love it. No fault of our own. Restaurants. I got the health department on my rear end. I got to deal with the state, federal regulation. Oh, hey, come bail us out, please. Come bail us out. We need more. What you've already done isn't enough. Come do more. Hotels, energy. All those rugged individuals out there in North Dakota and Texas, those cowboy capitalists. Oh, hey, come bail us out, please. Please. Sounds just like now. The RFC certainly paid off for these favored business groups. Of course they did. The excuse for the secrecy was that public confidence would be weakened if the identity of the shaky business or bank receiving RFC loans became widely known. How convenient. But, of course, these institutions, precisely because they were in weak and unsound shape, deserved to lose public confidence, and the sooner the better for both the public and for the health of the economy, which required the rapid liquidation of unsound investments in institutions. Amen. Amen. The crux of Austrian economics. During the first 5 months of the operation from February to June of 1932, the RFC made $1 billion worth of loans, of which 60% went to the banks and 25% to the railroads. The theory was that railroad bonds must be protected since many of these securities were held by savings banks and insurance companies, alleged agents of the small investor. In practice, the bulk of these RFC railroad loans went to repaying debt. Surprise, surprise, just like it's happening today. About a third of these loans went to repaying railroad debts to the bank. You're going to love this. Thus, one of the first RFC loans was $5.75 million to the Missouri Pacific Railroad to repay its debt to none other than J.P. Morgan and Company, and an $8 million loan to the B&O Railroad to repay its debts to Kuhn, Loeb and Company. Again, J.P. Morgan, Kuhn, Loeb, the Rockefellers, integral in establishing the Federal Reserve. One of the main enthusiasts for this policy was none other than Eugene Meyer, who touted it as, quote, promoting recovery, end quote, by, quote, putting more money into the banks, end quote. It certainly did the latter at the expense of the taxpayers and of propping up inefficient banks and businesses. Zombie companies now, zombie companies then. Here's the kicker. The loan to Missouri Pacific was a particularly egregious case, for as soon as Missouri Pacific performed its task of repaying its debt to Morgan, it was gently allowed to go into bankruptcy. Exactly what we were talking about last week with the tax provision in the Nobody Cares Act. Keep more cash on hand. Don't worry about paying taxes because you're going to lose the money anyway, so just keep the cash on hand. Companies do that, of course. The executives pay themselves handsomely with the tunes of millions of dollars, which we outlined last week, and then they go to court and file bankruptcy. As history repeats. Much more to get to, ladies and gentlemen, but we're going to leave it there. Please like, share, subscribe, get the word out, especially these last few podcasts. People have to have an appreciation for history. You can have a difference of opinion. You can say a bunch of poppycock, this is nothing. Yeah, it's nice to have some perspective, but it means nothing now because this time is different. You can have that, but at least have some of the understanding. At least have this as a data point in your arsenal of your thought process. So please get the word out, especially in regards to these last few podcasts and the coming podcasts, because we live in uncharted territory, but not as much as you think. Not as much as you think. And that's why it's important to turn as many people onto the Kapital News as you possibly can. I'm counting on you, and I thank everybody for subscribing and listening to this podcast. Truly appreciate it. Leave your comments. You know I love hearing from you. Stay diversified, stay vigilant, and stay with the Kapital News. I am Alex Karitis. Godspeed.